What inspired me most was the connection of Devi. And Devi is who inspires me the most throughout my daily life, at night before I go to bed, and, all throughout my livelihood so far.
Hi everyone, welcome to Chai Chats. I'm your host, Akhilesh Reddy Chopra. And today we have the privilege and honor of chatting with Adriana, with whom I've had the privilege of watching the Kona Dialogue Diverse Hindu Experience Speaker Series, where I came across her story and I was quite inspired with learning about her intersections as a Black Hindu and follower of Sanatana Dharma. Adriana graduated from John Carroll University with a BA in English Literature and East Asian Studies, and she's also a Fulbright Research alumni. And she also studied in Beijing, China. She and her cohort published a book called The Fulbright in a Time of COVID last year, where she has an article called The Great Peking Record of the Eastern Region, the account of a young scholar's life in China, preparatory to a global crisis. Adriana is also an incoming student for the Masters of Theological Studies at the Harvard Divinity School this fall. Thank you so much for joining me, Adriana, today. And I guess to just begin the Chai Chat, we'd love to hear a short introduction from you before we hop right into the Chai Chat.
All right, hi, thank you for having me. Yeah, my name is Adriana. I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. As you mentioned, went to school at John Carroll University. That's where I mostly spent my time in college. Graduated, and I guess 3 years later, within the pandemic, I'm finally going to Harvard. God, that took a while. But in general, what interested me in Hinduism is something that you'll be learning throughout this chai chat. And, what inspired me most was the connection of Devi. And Devi is who inspires me the most throughout my daily life, at night before I go to bed, and, all throughout my livelihood so far.
Awesome. And I completely resonate with that. I think one of the great things about Hinduism is sort of seeing the diversity in the ways in which it's practiced and the way that we have a personal connection with Hinduism,
Hmm.
whether that's through Devi or through the other gods or goddesses within the Hindu culture. Um,
Hmm.
and so I'm really excited to get into this conversation to learn more about, I suppose, how you first came across Sanatana Dharma or Hinduism. And I guess we'd be curious to learn more about what about Sanatana Dharma interested you, and um, what was it that spoke or what came out of it from your experience in learning and pursuing Sanatana? Kind of an open-ended question, but we just love to hear your story and how you came across it.
Of course. So it really all started when I was very young. I think I was the tender age of 5 or 6. My family and I would regularly visit our local art museum, the Cleveland Museum of Art, which, funny enough, I began interning and working there years later. So it was funny kind of how I continued onto that path. So while during my visits, I was most fascinated in what are known as the Chula bronzes. I didn't know what they were at the time because I was too young to understand what these images were, what they meant. But these exquisite bronzes were just so fascinating to me. I didn't know what the images meant, but they somehow resonated with me. They somehow sparked a connection with me. Especially, the most famous piece that we have at the Cleveland Museum of Art is of the dancing Shiva, where he has
Yeah.
the ring of fire and he's holding the drum, he's doing the mood, the down mudra like this.
Yes. Yeah.
And then he's standing on what looks like a baby, but it's actually a dwarf that represents ignorance and represents fear. And,
Mm.
you know, looking at that image when I was younger, I was so curious about it. I was like, what does this all mean? What is this ring of fire? What does it represent?
Yes.
Why is this image so, okay, not, I don't want to say the word scary, but why is it so intimidating yet, inspiring at the
Mm,
same time?
yeah.
And this was something years later that, because I was so into art, that's kind of how that led to my art track of, taking art classes, as I mentioned to you earlier,
No
all
way.
throughout high school.
Yeah.
And then this also kind of linked to my interest in Buddhist art.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, because, Buddhism it's spawned from Hinduism. So it's so interesting how it kind of led to that. That's how I kind of got into Chinese culture, learning the language and learning about Chinese Buddhism,
No way.
but going back in time. But what I do with Chinese Buddhism in particular, and with Inner Asian, which is Tibetan Buddhism, is
Yeah.
what you do with that is you go back. You kind of go
Mm,
back in time, which leads to the origination of these practices and how they spread from India to these other
yes.
regions, China, Japan,
Yeah.
Korea, Tibet,
Yeah.
Southeast Asia. It's so interesting how they all kind of spread and have their own sects at the same time. Well, there's three major sects, but they have kind of, which within each sect they have their own beliefs.
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
they're so similar to each other. And leading into that, what do you learn from that is the artwork. The art really represents those beliefs. So that's kind of how I got into
Yeah.
that. And moreover, with all of those interests, this is around the time where I really started diving into Hinduism more. Is, you know, the and I highly recommend anybody to read this book. This book really kind of changed my perspective on Hinduism. It's called Darshan. You may have heard of it. Diane Eck, she's a scholar at Harvard Divinity School, actually. She wrote the
Yeah.
book, and she talks about how, what Hindus believe is that, when you see the God, whether it's especially through the images,
Yes.
whether it's a statue, even a tapestry, I feel like
Yeah.
seeing the
Yeah.
God really, you know, it really kind of opens your eyes, and it really kind of puts you in front of the God or goddess themselves.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
where you kind of venerate that appreciation for
Mm,
your deity.
mm,
So, I mean, and when I read that book, it really just resonated with my beliefs. And I felt like this is what I was doing when I was younger, even at the tender age of 5 and 6, when I
yes.
visited to the museum.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is how Debbie kind of led me on to that same my area of research now. I visited the museum when I was little. I got into art, and then I ended up working at the museum, and now I'm going to grad school for that very
No
same
way.
area of focus. So that really inspired me, and that is where I felt like Debbie was really leading me. So that's why I
Yes.
dipped more into it.
Oh my goodness. Such a cool story. And I think one thing you touched on is how art can really be a gateway into
Mhm.
not just Hinduism, but I think cultures at large, how it's sort
Right.
of these explicit expressions that sort of, even at a young age, we may not understand or grasp fully, but we feel something, even when we're like in front of, as you mentioned, uh, Shiva or Natiraja.
Right.
And it's, yeah, just that effect or that energy, it's still very much present, even though the understanding may not fully be there. I completely resonate with that.
Exactly.
Um,
And the full understanding wasn't there because, like I said, it was younger. I hadn't
yeah.
understood. When I really started getting into Hinduism as well, which I also want to mention, is through Hindu text. This is something that I
Mm,
mentioned in the past. I've had a post on Hindu on Campus where I've talked about this, is
yeah.
how, I really wanted to start learning about it, not just through the art. I wanted, because when you read the text, you get a better context of what the art
Yes.
represents. So I
Yes.
really started and I started doing this when I was 13. I was a weird 13-year-old, but listen, I was reading these really complex texts
Um,
starting at 13 and 14, and it was it wouldn't be the whole text. It would mostly be just excerpts of
Yeah.
whether it was the Bhagavad Gita or the Ramayana or any other text like
Mm,
that. I just wanted to get the reading going, especially Rig Veda. I read a lot of Rig
yeah.
Veda. I really
Oh
just
my
kind of wanted to get
goodness.
that going so that I can
Yes.
understand, what I need to do.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And I'm curious, when you were doing these readings, I guess, if you remember at that young age, sort of what were the things that came out or spoke to you? Um,
Um,
yeah,
See, so in the Ramayana, Sita's relationship with Ganga,
yeah,
that
yeah.
really spoke to me because, Ganga represents purification, but then at the same time, if you remember the Ramayana in the very beginning, you know, Ganga was leading Sita almost to her death. So it can also represent your demise too.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's kind of interesting how you have that aniconic representation of water
yes,
through the text.
yes, yes,
So
yes,
it's so
yes.
fascinating. And what's funny was when I worked at the museum and when I was learning about each piece in our collection, because the area that I worked in was Indian, South and Southeast Asian, and Himalayan. That was like my main area while working there. Was that in a lot of early images of in a lot of early Indian images, elephants represented water. And I was like, wait, how is this
Really?
possible? Yeah. I was
I
like,
didn't
wait,
know
how is this
that.
even possible?
Yeah.
But it makes sense because if you look at the overlapping differences between the elephants in India versus the elephants in Africa, the elephants, in South Asia, they love water. And
Mm,
I just when I learned that, I noticed that I was like, wait, I do notice that
yeah,
they love water here, but the ones in Africa not so much.
gotcha, gotcha. That's that's so interesting, even I guess seeing how that plays out in like your own like lived experience, seeing that up front, like something
Right.
that's I guess as ancient as, could be thousands of years old, but then seeing how I guess those teachings or I guess visual representations can very much apply to our everyday lives,
Right,
sort of
right.
as you just mentioned.
Hmm.
And I guess like on that topic, um, as you were reading these texts, you mentioned that even as at an already young age, there were things that you found those things were already incorporated into your own life. I'm curious about what were some of the, I guess, values or teachings that sort of resonated with you at that time, and whether that's changed with where you are now, or whether those teachings have, I guess, had that continuity throughout your life.
Well, I guess the one example I can use is Durga's story in Mahishasuramadini. That was just the most inspirational to me. You have this warrior goddess that was created to defeat this, what seemed to be this invincible, undefeated enemy that
Yeah,
was at threat of destroying the entire world. And here she comes along. And it doesn't take much effort for her to defeat him. So it really just inspires me as, a young woman, and especially a young Black woman in this world, of all the challenges that I face, especially in academia, because there's not
mm,
many of us. There aren't many of us.
yeah,
And the trials and tribulations I still have to face, even in everyday life, whether it's just going out into the world, doing normal things that I do, whether it's getting a job
mm,
or, like I said, with the academia, navigating my way through there, really trying to get my name out there.
yeah, yeah,
Um, it really, Durga really just, and her story really just pushed me to keep going,
mm,
and that, nothing is invincible, nothing is
yeah,
unattainable,
yes,
and that I can do it. And that so far, I guess I've done well so far.
100%. I guess that's sort of leads me to, and you sort of already touched on it, but I guess what does Devi mean to you?
Davy to me means never giving up hope.
Mm.
It means never giving up on the things that you're passionate about, never giving up on the things that you love, the things that you care about. And, when you have these things that you appreciate, really giving that appreciation to others, whether it's spreading the knowledge that you have
Yeah.
and spreading the, I guess it really means just never taking things that you have for granted. Okay, like, because many people, they have a lot of knowledge, but they aren't willing to share it.
Mm.
They aren't willing to help other people with it. So it really means just using, and I feel like that's a part of what Hinduism is all about, is about sharing what you have
Mm.
to those around you.
Yeah.
It's about, I mean, and you're not supposed to be selfish. That's all what it's about anyway.
Yeah.
So that's what Devi means to me. It's, she's given me, I feel like she's given me all of this knowledge, and she's telling me go out into the world, use it, educate others, inspire others.
Yeah.
And learn from others. It's not just
Yes.
about you. That's what's most important too.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I mean. That's one of the things that Krishna says, is that it's not always
Yes.
about you.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And that's
Yes.
what's wrong with the world. Everybody's making things about themselves. Stop
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. It really is like it's so profound, even in like these ancient texts. It's interesting how in what would seem simple, I guess when
Hmm.
spoken about is actually quite profound, because like even in the Bhagavad Gita, talking about the human experience, or when Arjuna approaches Krishna with all of his uncertainties and questions,
Right.
um, and even seeing the setting of how it takes place on the battlefield, and it's a conversation. um, I think even one of the things that spoke out to me most from Hinduism is um, almost that sense of conversation, that you can ask questions, and there
Exactly.
are answers to those questions, and they don't always, I guess, need a so quote unquote profound answer, where a lot of it lies in the simplicity of, as you just said, taking a step back, listening to one another, passing forward knowledge. Um, I think to me, I definitely resonate. That's something that I think I definitely took to as well.
I resonate with it too. And I just feel like, especially over COVID,
Yeah,
it's one of those, okay, taking a step back was one of those things in the past. I think before COVID, it was one of those things where, like, I would preach it, but I wouldn't exactly practice it all the way because I'm not perfect. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
and I'm probably one of the most, if you can ask my friends, I'm probably one of the most stubborn people in the world. So, but I mean, now that we are in the time of COVID, we are forced to take a step back. We were forced to stop everything that we were doing. So we
Yes.
really had to take that time to step back and listen and learn from one another.
100%. I guess I'm also curious, with, I guess, different identities of, being a scholar, being in academia, being a Black woman, and also being a follower of Sanatana Dharma. I'm curious about um, how these intersections have shaped the way that you, I guess, experience the world.
Are you referring to like how other people see it, or how I utilize it?
How you utilize that.
Well, I take the step forward and educate others. I try my best to, especially living in the Midwest, where I don't know if you could even imagine what it's like out here. There's not a
Uh,
lot of people you're not going to meet a lot of people here who are Black and Hindu.
mm,
That's all I'm going to say. So, I mean,
I hear
I've
you.
had to face a lot of different questions.
Mm,
Just the other week, I was at an Indian restaurant, and when I told the waitress I was, because I had just come from the temple that day, I
gotcha.
told,
Yeah.
and the waitress was wondering what I was wearing, and
Mm,
she was Indian too.
yeah.
Um, she was like, "Oh, that's so fascinating that you're wearing that." And when I told her I was Hindu, she was like, "Really?" Like almost like she didn't believe me.
Okay.
Yeah,
I hear you.
that's when I really was like, okay, this, and I'm so used to it now because I feel like I face that a lot, especially living here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not only just here, but in China as well. There's literally little to no Hindus out there.
Okay.
I've only, at my school, I've only met one other student that was Hindu.
Oh,
And he and I
wow.
became really good friends. So, because we were like the only two Hindus at the
Yeah,
school.
understandable.
So, I
Understandable.
really just, living in China, living in a world where there was even less than like me being black and female in China was just
Yeah.
one thing, but me being Hindu as well there was
Mm,
like, okay, wow. You know, out there it was really interesting. I mostly got a lot of questions. Many people were fascinated and they just wanted to know more about Hinduism in general. And I was happy to
gotcha.
educate. And I
Gotcha.
learned through there that when I do that, it really helps a lot of people. I just, because before I had traveled to China back and forth like I was just so used to people questioning me. I think back then I would feel some type of way about it, like, oh my God, why are you questioning me? How dare you?
Yeah. Yeah.
But back then I just didn't have the ears to actually listen and to actually
Mm,
take in what their questions were and why they may be asking these questions. When the
mm,
simple fact could have been they just don't know.
yeah.
They don't know about it.
Very,
Like,
very true.
and I'm thinking, I'm back then, I'm looking at myself back then when I'm in China educating people. I'm like, Adriana, why don't you do this? Just teach them like you're doing here in China.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
coming back from China and having the experience of traveling there back and forth with these, I guess, triple, quadruple identities that I have, um, I really did learn from that. I learned that all it takes is just communication.
Yeah.
Communication's key. Just listen, just sit and listen. And for once, don't get offended if they ask these questions.
So
Because
true. Yeah.
trust me, when I was living in Beijing and when I traveled back and forth, because I traveled all the way to the countryside as well, like
Wow.
in mostly more inner China and in the Xinjiang province. I've traveled
Yeah.
all the way out there too. And these were a lot of these people have never met foreigners in their lives. So I've had to face questions about, my ethnicity and not anything rude, but just, out of curiosity.
Yeah.
So I had
Yes.
to really take that mindset when I came back to the US. I really had to take that mindset into play. And now, when people ask me these things, I don't get offended or anything like that.
Mm,
I just take the simple initiative to teach them.
yes. Yes. It's, I can't imagine, but I guess I can understand because I think it's sometimes a misnomer that, you know, if you're a Hindu, you have to be from the Indic subcontinent.
Yeah,
Um, but I think that's, again, one of the interesting things about even exploring Hinduism when we talk about Dharma, it being universal, how
right.
it's even Sanatana Dharma, eternal consciousness, the eternal sort of duty or
Right.
way of life. And so I think even just seeing how that applies into our everyday interactions, I think
Right. And
is
see, I think I should
huge.
reiterate when I educate, I do tend to educate other people, but I feel like when it comes to some of these professors and other people in academia who, try to say, oh, this is how Hinduism works, and if they're not
Mm,
Hindu,
yeah.
it's a little tricky, but I feel like anybody can get through to any of these people. You can get through to them, and they just have to take the initiative themselves to listen. So, because
Yes.
I see a lot of, I see a lot of people on, whether it's on Instagram or other platforms, who, and I've done it too, where we will voice our opinions about these specialists and what they say, but you know, you can get through them. You can try to. If they don't want to listen, it's their problem. Just take it that way.
Yeah.
It's their problem at the end of the day if they don't want to take the initiative to listen, to learn. Because I feel like, and this is something that I had to understand going into academia, you can't have that high horse where you're just, oh, look at me, I specialize in this, so I know everything about it. You know, I think I think that's what's wrong with a lot of, not a lot, but a few of these specialists who say that they know this much about the religion. They think because they have all these degrees and these titles that they just know everything about it. And you know, that's where that comes from. It's just, it is something that you know, in a lot of Hindu scriptures, it advocates against ego, the negative form of ego.
Yes.
And that's kind of what that is.
Yes. It's, I don't know, I'm already very inspired by, because like even for myself being a recent graduate, and I guess I'll be taking my first steps into the real world, I suppose. And as you said, in academia, there can be situations when you're faced with, I guess, folks with maybe strong or rigid beliefs about the religion and the culture. Do you have any advice for youth like myself in sort of grappling with those kinds of situations, I suppose?
My advice for dealing with some of these people with higher titles who may have opinions about the religion. Well, the simplest advice I can give to you on that is just communication. Really listen to, you don't have to agree with what they're saying. I don't agree with what they're saying all the time. You don't have to agree with it, but listen. Because what happens is when you listen, you can pinpoint where the fallacies might be. You can pinpoint where the issues might be in their arguments. And then that's when, and this is how, I mean, this is debate 101 that I'm teaching you. This is like debate team 101. You pinpoint what the fallacies, what the issues are in their argument, or their not even their opinions, but their views on the faith. And then that's when you can kind of, you know, you don't have to pounce on them, but you can say, okay, hey, I see where you're saying, I see why you're saying this here, and this is my view on this. You know, you can understand why they may think that. Why they may view it in that way, where it's coming from. Because sometimes I feel like what happens, and I've talked about this before, sometimes what I feel like happens is that some of these specialists, especially the ones who are based in the West, are viewing it from a Western perspective. They're viewing it from their own Western perspective. They're not seeing, they don't even, they have tunnel vision. They don't even want to see it from the other perspective. Because they're so used to, and many scholars, I'm not even blaming anybody in particular, many scholars do this here. And yes, we're all sick of it, but at the same time, we need to understand where it comes from. Where does that Western lens come from in particular, and how can we break it down? To where they can see, to where they can see, you know, those other avenues. What I'm saying, I'm not telling anybody to, don't back down from what you stand for, because Arjuna still goes into war. He's not, you know, he doesn't back down, but he takes these new tools and he utilizes them. What I'm saying is take these tools that, or I mean, just take what I'm saying and utilize that. Don't, you know, I'm not saying don't back down. Don't be like, okay, well, I see, I'll agree with you. You don't, like I said, you don't have to agree with them. Don't. By any means, don't agree with them, please. Just take those tools and go into battle as you see fit.
Oh my goodness. I appreciate it. And I guess on another note, given your academic background and learning about the histories of Eastern culture, whether that's Tibetan Buddhism or Sanatana Dharma. I guess I'm curious on what's your take on um, how or why these ancient cultures have lasted so long, for thousands of years. Uh, what is it that, I guess, has made those cultures survive or continue? Um, I think, yeah, I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
It's okay. It's really interesting. I would, okay, in some cases, I'm going to argue preservation. They've preserved it. You know, they're so good at preserving these traditions. But
Mm,
at the same time, when you dip into China and Inner Asia, and especially in Tibet and, you know, parts of Inner Asia, Mongolia, the Himalayas, things like that, I think it gets a little more complex because if you remember, the Mongols have invaded many different
yeah,
parts of these regions. And especially what I researched, what my Fulbright research was, and what I plan on continuing to research while at Harvard, are the nomadic group known as the Tongans. They are an extinct nomadic group that lived in Western China.
gotcha.
We don't know much about them other than the last few texts that they have, because many of their, I don't know if you know, many of their texts were destroyed by the Mongols. They were ripped apart, burned, whatever. And then you have the art, some of the artifacts that are left behind. And then you have a language that's dead that not many people can translate. You know, there are some specialists out there that are working on translating it now, but it's very hard. So, but you know, all in the same day, it's believed that they practice Buddhism with a mix of nomadic Tangrism, which is
Gotcha.
what's worshipped in Mongolia. Well,
Gotcha.
it's kind of like a nomadic religion in Mongolia, and it's believed that it's blended with that. So, you know, you have aspects of Buddhism that are preserved, but then you have a mixture of local
Yes.
beliefs that are
Yes.
mixed into it. And you'll see this in many different parts of Asia, especially in many different regions of China. They have their own, many places in China have their own beliefs and takes
Mhm.
on Buddhism.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
perfect example is the Bodhisattva. That's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
in some parts of China, in the Bodhisattva, the general definition, if anybody's watching, if they don't know, is, um, well, there's two definitions. The early Indian definition is that the Bodhisattva is the Buddha before he became the Buddha,
Yeah.
is Gautama before he became the Buddha.
Yes.
The definition that was transmitted into East Asia is the attendant or an assistant of the Buddha. So it's kind of interesting how it
Oh,
overlaps like that. Yeah, it's so interesting. And then you know, oh my gosh, don't even get me started about China and Japan. They have so many different bodhisattvas. There's one in Japan for, I think he's like a bodhisattva for children. Like he takes care
okay.
of children.
Yeah.
They have that one. And then you know, in some parts of China, the bodhisattva is a female and a male. So it's, you know, it's
Yeah.
so interesting how they kind of, and that's what I've said. And you know, you can thank most of this because of the Silk Road. You
Mm,
know, a lot of those beliefs were
yes.
transmitted, and then, you know, as they kind of made their ways into these different parts of Asia, they've
Mm,
kind of come up with their own, you know, local beliefs,
yes.
and over
Yes.
time they just kind of developed. So it's just really
Mm,
interesting, and that's what I mean. And that's really a way to preserve traditional beliefs like that,
yes.
is, you know, when they're transmitted, when they move to all of these different places, they pick up their own local beliefs.
Yes. That's so interesting because I was instantly reminded of like, I guess Hinduism in India, but then you see
Hmm.
Balinese Hinduism in Bali and how I guess as
You
you
know, it's
said, it
funny,
picks
Balinese
up.
Hinduism it's similar to the Hinduism that I follow. Like I have my own sect. I don't think there's a name for mine at all, but it's similar to that one. It's
No
so
way.
funny. Yeah.
So interesting. And like I remember giving a talk, and I had coined my own term that culture is everlasting and ever changing. And it's sort of,
Right.
we take maybe it's the core values that come from the ancient past, but then with our
Mm-hmm.
current generation, we add our own flavor to it. And so
Mm-hmm.
how it's expressed visibly is very different. But I never thought of, as you said, part of preservation can actually be the amalgamation or the adding
Yes.
to that culture,
Yes.
um, for it to exist for as long as it has. I've never thought
Mm-hmm.
about it that way. That's
Yeah, that's how, I mean, that's really the main way they preserve these traditions.
yeah,
Many parts of the world.
yes, yes. Interesting. And I guess now, in terms of where we're at with the global West, the age of technology, things rapidly shifting,
Hmm.
um, when we talk about cultural preservation, I guess in it's also a loaded question or a larger question, but what are ways, perhaps as, I mean, a two-part question, as individuals versus as a society, what can we do to, um, I guess, preserve the culture, while understanding that things are rapidly changing? Because what you said with adding on to it, I see that can also, like, I wonder if it needs to be done in a certain way so as to not necessarily quote unquote whitewash or completely change the underlying
Right.
values
Hmm.
of that culture. I'm curious to know what would be your take on that.
That's a really good question because I feel like with the age of technology, it really does change that. Because back then, especially during the times of the Silk Road, there was no technology. There was, well, not the technology that we know of.
Yes.
There was no technology like we have. There wasn't
Yeah.
any social media or anything like that. But social, what I feel like now is that social media can come into play and it can be utilized to help in this way to preserve, because with social media you're able to keep records.
Yes.
You're able to keep those
True.
records of certain things, especially with the movement that we have now on Instagram. Whether it's what
Yeah.
Hindu on campus is doing,
Yes.
what Kona is doing, these are ways in which we can preserve is through social media. That is a new form of technology that we have where
Mm,
we can preserve these things.
yes.
I saw one post on, I don't know who said it on Twitter. I'm sorry, person, whoever you are, that I can't quote you directly, but somebody on Twitter said that um, social media itself is like a textbook, if you think about
Very
it.
true.
It's,
Yeah.
because you have, yeah, with Twitter, you have mostly wording and quotes and things like that, but you have a record of that.
Yes.
It just depends
Yes.
on how you utilize these records.
Yes.
We don't have to always cancel people. We can just utilize it to
Yes. Yes.
to
For sure.
educate those who are coming into the world.
Mm,
We can
yeah.
use it as a time machine. It's a time machine. I would like to call it a time machine because
Yeah.
it kind of is in a way.
Yes. Oh my goodness. But I really resonate. I think part of why I feel so fortunate is even amidst COVID, I had social media to sort of fall back on to learn about, um,
Right,
all of
exactly.
this. And it happened at an interesting time when, um, a lot of these Hindu pages were coming up.
Yeah.
Hindus on campus, American Hindus. Um, and so I feel very fortunate to sort of almost ride that wave in a
I do
sense.
too. I do
Yeah,
too. That's really how I really got involved was over COVID, really
yeah,
exploring these different pages, getting
yeah,
involved in that way, especially with
yes,
Hindu on campus, Hindu Samata and
yeah,
Kona. That's really how I
yes,
got involved was over COVID. I just really wanted to connect with other people who were at least like me
yeah,
or who followed the same path as I did and things like that. So
yes,
it really resonated with me in that way, and I'm grateful as well.
100%. 100%. Well, I think this brings us to the end of our chai chats, but I just wanted to so deeply thank you for coming on to chai chats and uh, for both sharing, your story and your journey towards um, uh, learning about these Dharmic cultures and then applying that into both your everyday life, your personal life, and your work life, and to see how that's transpired is truly inspirational. And I'm sure I'll be looking back on this conversation and taking the things that you've said and applying them to my life. So I appreciate it, and I'm sure the viewers watching this would also think the same. So thank you so much, Adriana.
Thank you for having me. This was a wonderful conversation, and I'm glad that I've contributed in this way. I'm glad you allowed me to open up, and I really want to
Yeah,
thank you for that.
of course. Thank you so much.
No problem.